No matter how I address this story and the controversy surrounding it, I will get attacked from the left. Leftists, feminists, TERFs, whatever you want to call it, intersectionalists, they are going to criticize me no matter what for simply talking about this. Well, you know what? I don't know what else you want me to do. Because here's the story. A transgender individual, born male, has filed a police report against another male for a hate crime. And you want to know why? Because the male, who is an adult filmmaker, there's an adult filmmaker who said, let's hook up and film it. Upon finding out the other person was actually a transgender individual with male body parts, said no. So the trans individual filed a hate crime. It's complicated, it's confusing, but long story short, it's two biological males. Now you're going to hear people, the trans activists saying, no, this person transitioned to female. No, you can't transition to female. Legally, in a sense, you can, but biologically, you can't. That's the distinction I'm making. So while this individual may be legally female on paper, they have biologically male parts. And now everything falls apart. And I'll tell you why. There's no way to actually talk about this. I will be criticized for pushing a right-wing talking point no matter what I say. I've talked about these issues in the past before. And I've talked about the need for expanding civil rights and protecting people from violence and harassment, workplace discrimination, etc. And I got attacked from the left. And I was confused. Oh, wait, why am I getting flack from leftists over this? It's because there is no unification on the left over this issue. The right is certainly opposed to it for the most part. So the right typically says, no matter what, they're like, yep, I'm hearing what you're saying. I agree. But here's the thing. Well, that's the gist of this story. And I think it speaks for itself. How do you compel a male to engage in adult activities with another male if they don't want to do it? How is that a hate crime? I'll stress one important point. This is in the UK. In the US, you are legally allowed to discriminate against somebody in entertainment. I don't know if that goes into the adult filmmaking industry, but I do know that if you're making a Hollywood movie, you can literally say, we want this race, this gender, and this age. And you can't do that for basically any other job. There are a few exceptions, right? So, but you're making a movie and you're like, I need an old dude to play old man. They can't say you're discriminating because you want a character for the screen. In this instance, in the UK, it's beyond absurd. I couldn't believe this was real when I saw this. It's a guy who has no attraction to male parts. How can you investigate them for a hate crime over this? How is this even entertained in the first place? And this is where we're heading. See, here's the problem. If I come out in favor of the trans individual in this circumstance, I will get attacked from the left because feminists, I guess gender critical feminists is what they describe themselves as, and many lesbians in the lesbian community will say this is not transphobia. People have preferences. You can't support this. And so I back away. I say, you know what, man? All right. So I've made many videos about trans athletes winning and the need for protections and how to navigate this problem. And I got a barrage of criticism from feminists saying that I was a misogynist. I was a misogynist for supporting biological males competing against biological females. And I wasn't even really supporting them. I was just talking about the issue as a milquetoast fence-sitter, as I normally do. So eventually I said, you know what? Enough. There is no solution to this. All of the attacks come from the left. But there is a viral thread that I think is particularly important that breaks this down. So let me just get to the point on the first video. I'm sorry, on the first story. That's basically the story. That's where we're at, okay? A biological male has filed a hate crime charge against another biological male for not wanting to engage in adult acts. I think that's insane. It's nuts. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. All I know is by saying that, don't be surprised when YouTube deletes this video for hate speech or some other nonsense. But how do we talk about this? How do we say you can't force people to be in a relationship with someone they don't have an attraction to? A hate crime? I get it. It's a work industry thing because you're talking about adult filmmaking. But how? It's insane. It's literally we're at that point. Here's a thread from someone on Twitter called named Laura Adams Miller. This thread has gone decently viral, explaining the problem of gay rights versus trans rights and why one was easy and one is difficult. And to put it simply, just not to waste, we'll read through this. It's an amazing thread. When the gay community was seeking rights, it was a stable movement that said, let us do our thing and leave us alone. The trans community, on the other hand, and the gender movement is different. They're saying you must change. So the general point is, you can pass a law saying that you can't discriminate against someone based on who they love and what they do in their own private business, and they show up to work and they do whatever they want. The gender movement is saying you must use pronouns. You must adhere to what we think. You must allow us to enter your spaces as opposed to being left alone. So that's kind of the difference. And this is actually a really good example of, I think, the real divide between anti-SJW and SJW. For those that follow my channel, and there's been a lot of critique on this, I had a conversation with David Pakman, and I mentioned that identity politics, I think, can be dangerous. David said, but you, because I said the reason for it is because of my mixed race heritage, I've experienced this, and he goes, aha, but that's identity politics. The point I was making was a negative, right? So I was saying, because I've experienced the problems of identity politics, I think it's all bad. And he then said to me, but that is identity politics. Fine. I think identity politics can be good in many regards. But this is the perfect example of where I think many of us draw the line. The leave me alone versus the do as I say. One's authoritarian, one's libertarian. The leave me alone and let me live my life is liberty. The you must adhere to what I want and make love with me even if you're not physically attracted to my body, that's an entirely strange world to be in. That's authoritarian. And that's one of the big differences. You can take a look at the body positivity movement. Well, if a guy isn't attracted to an obese woman, you can't make him. But they say that's fat phobic. They're playing this game of you must change your life for us instead of letting us live ours peacefully. You see the difference? Let's read this thread. It's fascinating. Laura Adams Miller says, homosexuals want recognition of their rights because ultimately the rest of society changes very little in allowing gays to marry, hold jobs, and be free from harassment and violence. It's a stable movement because heterosexual people didn't have to radically alter their lives for us. The gender movement is an inverted movement. Rather than basic protections common to all people, members of the movement are demanding that all of society make radical changes to policy, personal habits, language, parenting, professional, etc. Now, I'll give you an example. Let's jump back to the story about Rachel McKinnon, a transgender individual born male who just won a World Masters sprint against biological females. At its core, you can argue they're the same thing, that you can't discriminate against someone based on who they love. But here's the difference. If you're a man who loves a man, you still compete as a man, right? The transgender movement is different because you're asking society to recognize you as a biological female, which means now you're asking biological females to allow you to enter their space. That's very different because lesbians, the gay community, bisexuals, everything else stayed the same. Male and female sports are still separated regardless of who you love. It has no bearing, right? So there's tons of female athletes who are straight and gay, and there's tons of male athletes who are straight and gay, and it does nothing to the greater athletic community. The same is true for adult filmmaking. There are, two men who go and make a film and they're attracted to each other, and they'll make a film, and there are two women who will make a film and they're attracted to each other, and there you go. But now we're at a point where because people want a similar concept, you can't discriminate against me, that means because I now identify as what you qualify as, I get access to your space, and that is a radically different movement. I don't know if inverted is the right way to put it, but it is very different, and I hope I explained it, but let's read. Laura says, homosexuals asked that we be allowed what everyone is allowed, that we can marry the adult consenting unrelated person of our choosing, that we can raise our children, keep our jobs. We asked for inaction in the form of not seeking to punish us for our personal lives. And that's simple. I run a business. You want to work for me. You say, I can build, a log cabin in a couple days. And I say, that's great. And then you tell me that you're married to a man. I'll say, I don't care. Can you build a cabin? Right? It's that simple. But what if you're trying to make an adult film? Well, it's not the same as you saying, hey, at home, I'm married to a man or a woman. And I say, I don't care. Can you do the job? But what if you then say, biologically, I don't fit the role? Well, in the UK, that's a hate crime. Laura goes on to say, the gender movement is demanding that we convert to their ideology and practice their beliefs. You can employ a gay person without voicing moral agreement with them, but current non-discrimination practices for trans employees demand you live as though you share their beliefs, right? You have to use their pronouns. You have to change your language for them. This is an unstable movement because it will never not require brute and social political force to maintain. There's nothing organic about using pronouns that conflict with natural speech. There's nothing sustainable about asking every person you meet how they identify, especially when the overwhelming majority, 90+%, identify simply and are easily discernible from other identities. And I want to make sure I stress this point, man, because this is left criticism, okay? This individual, this is a lesbian writer, lesbian mother, biological healthcare professional, women's liberationist, whatever you want to call this person. This criticism is from the left, not the right. This person 10 years ago was a diehard left-wing supporter fighting for gay rights. And I actually did campaign work for the Human Rights Campaign when I was a nonprofit fundraiser. Yet now simply talking about this is going to be called a right-wing talking point. It makes no sense if you have two individuals on the left in critiquing each other. I don't know where you go from here, but I have to stress this because invariably they will say this video is Tim pushing right-wing talking points. I'm reading a lesbian's take on the gender movement. Whatever. Let's read. She writes, the gender movement is demanding far more than any true human rights movement in history has. We're meant to enact scientific and medical practices that aren't evidence-based. We're being told to compromise our privacy, our private practices, our religious beliefs. It's just, well, hold on. I'll stop there and say that's true for churches right now as well. Okay, so this does, what you're saying does reflect to an extent on the gay and lesbian community as well. Beto O'Rourke said he was going to take away tax exemption from churches who refuse to perform same-sex marriages. So I don't think religious beliefs is an apt argument. You can't tell a church to respect an Abrahamic tradition for something that goes against their religion, but then question the trans community in the same capacity. I disagree with that. Let's read on. It's distressing in the short term and unsustainable in the long term. People won't accept this indefinitely. It will be torn down along with every movement that's being falsely associated with it. This will hurt gay rights and disability rights and women's rights. The modern era of social justice thrives on upheaval, and I understand why. It's thrilling to see old institutions come down. The feeling of seemingly unmovable objects being moved. It feels like anything is possible, but history shows us that not all societal shift is positive. Never in history has forcing a population to practice a belief system against their will been a positive change. Violating freedom of thought, speech, association, assembly, that has never indicated progress towards justice. I'm going to stop here too and throw some criticism here. When it comes to whether or not a bakery can discriminate, for the most part, we have civil rights law saying, hey, you might not agree with this, but you have to adhere to certain practices. Now, this is still widely debated in society, right? The baker in Colorado won, and it's constantly facing legal battle. And recently, I believe some other female artists also won. So it'll be an interesting battle between the First Amendment, you creating a product as a form of your expression versus the civil rights law. So I don't know where we're going to go, but I will stress that it's this targeting the gender movement, I believe, is missing some of the greater context here. For one thing, I will say they are completely correct in that when it comes to granting, gay marriage and rights and everything, we don't change our language. We don't change our lives at all for the most part. Now, there may be some small things, like somebody wants a specific cake made with 2 grooms instead of, or 2 brides. And you can argue whether you want to do that. And you can make the cake and then hand them, you go buy your own bride and do it yourself. So there are small societal ramifications to gay rights. Totally agree with that. But the difference with the gender movement is we have women's sports for a reason. There was a statement made recently in a lawsuit that they said if anyone can identify as a woman, and that's what the law states in the U.S., particularly, I believe the Equality Act goes into this, but in New York especially. In New York, I don't have to do anything. You don't got to take hormones. You don't have to do anything. You can literally just say you are male or you are female. You don't need a diagnosis. You need nothing. If that's the case, and there's a prize pool, right? So I'll put it this way. They try and claim that no one is going to go through the process of transition just to get an easier time winning competitions or to go into women's bathrooms. But that's not the case. The law doesn't have a requirement for transition. Quite literally, a biological male. Hold on, I will stop. There are some testosterone qualifications, like you have to reduce your T levels to a certain point. But in New York City, they don't have that requirement in the law, which means if there was something where it was like women can enter for a chance to win $1 million, if they can, and then it's a punching contest. Yeah, I could walk up and just say, I'm a woman. Let me in. Hey, it's $1 million. You have what, 13 million people in the New York metro, the tri-state area essentially. I assure you there will be at least 2 or 3 dudes who have no scruples and no ethics and would have no problem exploiting this system. So the argument made by these females was that if anyone can be a woman, then you've effectively removed protections for women, because now literally, males can just say they are, if anyone can be. Let's read more of Laura's tweet. She says, "I never believed in gender. This idea that man and women are internal feelings separate from chromosomal and reproduction. But I supported trans people anyway because I didn't feel required to agree with them. I didn't feel required to submit to their doctrine. I used the pronouns to be polite, and because those pronouns weren't the loaded prospects they've become. But now there's this gotcha quality to it, as if, quote, she equals trans women are women, literally biologically female, all rights are now gender rather than, biologically based. I will stress another point as well. You have people who are changing their birth certificates and changing their IDs. And while I understand that, in concept, I understand the argument, I suppose, I don't believe it makes much sense. There's a reason why we say you're male or female, not because of the way you look, right? It's really challenging. I'll admit this whole argument, everything is challenging, and it's a shame, in my opinion, that anybody who wants to bring it up and work through these problems is called transphobic. But the reason we put M and F on your license is not just because we wanted to arbitrarily classify you based on what you look like. It's because it has impacts in the law and medical procedures. Medical reasons for the most part. If you're having a heart attack, men and women can experience different symptoms, in which case, if you don't look, if you've transitioned, there could be serious ramifications. Not only that, but people who transition there are side effects to transition. So if you're male and you take, hormones, you will experience something unique that men and women do not by taking those hormones. Some women might because they take hormone supplements at a certain point in their age, but there's a reason why all of this is important. When someone has something specific to their biology that could affect them medically, they wear wristbands, and it's got the snake on the thing, and it says, hey, I'm allergic to this. So an example would be like if you're allergic to a certain antibiotic, you wear the bracelet. That way, if you end up in an accident, you go to the hospital, they look at that and say, don't give them this antibiotic, they're allergic. There was there was another tweet about a guy who was an EMT saying that the way he would react to a male versus a female is extremely important, and the medications they provide is important. But now that IDs and birth certificates and everything are being changed, it's going to have an impact on how they can save lives. Let's read a little bit more. Laura says that she feels betrayed by the movement. As a lesbian, she advocated for trans rights along with her own. Now trans lesbians march in opposition to me and my sisters. They demand our resources, our spaces, our platforms, our emotional energy. They demand access to our bodies. And this is true. I'm not going to pretend it's like literally every trans person all the time and it's this big, big, big problem, but it does happen. And it happens that there are people who are biologically male who transition to female but are still attracted to females and then accuse lesbians of being transphobic, and it's seriously a thing. So, you know what? This is a really, really long thread. I'm not going to read through the whole thing because I think you get the point. I'll read the final tweet here. It says, the gender movement is a movement without perspective or empathy. It disdains compromise and ignores any interest it doesn't share. Because no group, except maybe women, will work against its own interests indefinitely, the gender movement will fail, and I refuse to go down with it. This individual, the thread went viral to an extent. It's got 1,000 retweets, and I see a lot of conservatives sharing it. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about. Obviously, I don't agree with everything this individual said. I think there certainly were, with gay rights, there was, beliefs pushed on certain people or they were told to take certain actions. But ultimately, I think this is a good example of SJW versus anti-SJW. The point I made earlier, I'll end with. Telling someone they have to behave in a certain way versus telling someone just leave me alone, I think is a really good example. So if it's not perfectly black or white, right? If I want to go to a business and that business says, we don't want to serve your kind, I believe you should just do it, right? Like if I want a cheeseburger at a restaurant and they say, hey, you're mixed, we don't serve your kind around here, that I think is crossing the line because you can serve me the same as everybody else. If I ask you to do something beyond what you would normally do. So it is complicated. It really is. It really is. But this is why I think we need to talk about it. I don't think I have a perfect answer. I really don't. I think civil rights was extremely important, but then I look at what Harvard is doing and discriminating against Asians, and I think that's horrifying. So I'll put it this way. I go into a burger shop and I say, just serve me the burger the same as everybody else. Fine, you should. But what if I go in and say, no, I demand a vegan burger? And they say, we don't sell vegan burgers. Then you are discriminating against me and you must change your business and carry this product. Or you must say certain words, I think is where you get into the authoritarian aspect of it. So here's what I'm going to say. The reason I wanted to talk about this, the story from the Daily Mail was just so outrageous and insane that I don't even know where we're headed or how this will carry forward. Because you will find you cannot force someone to make love to someone. It doesn't work. Conversion therapy doesn't work. If they're not attracted, they're not attracted. Now it's a hate crime. So how does this end? I honestly don't know. I don't think I have all the answers, but I do think it's important to highlight. And I also was really frustrated because there is no way to address this without being called right-wing, even though it's the left fighting with the left. Naturally, the right is also pushing back alongside, individuals like Laura, who's a lesbian, and they will agree with her. But no matter which left-wing position I take on this issue, I will be called either transphobic or misogynist. So you know what? I don't know what you expect from me, but I will tell you this. If we don't work these problems out, it will only get worse for everybody. Stick around. Next segment is coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel, and I will see you all there.